Hey, how y'all doing today? Craig at Willie Farms here again. Today I want to talk to you about feeding your bees. But when you have a dearth or a lack of nectar flow, the bees are in danger of starving. They need that nectar flow to keep producing young and to feed the rest of the colony. So in West Kentucky here, we usually have a good honey flow the first part of spring right up until the end of May or so. And then the clover picks up, and as long as it stays below 90 degrees, they can gather nectar off the clover. We have enough of it around here that it will work, the white clover. However, in July and August, there is a dearth. There is no nectar flows of any major kind to help feed your bees. They can still gather some pollen, dried flowers, and vegetable flowers that may be growing in your garden, and some other things that are blooming, but the nectar is going to be lacking. So you will need to feed your bees. And you say, well, how do I know when it's time to feed my bees? If you put syrup where the bees can get to it in their hive or outside their hive, if they do not have a nectar flow, they will feed on the one-to-one syrup, simple syrup that you provide them. If there is a sufficient nectar flow, they won't touch that syrup. They will leave it be, and it will sit there, and you'll notice that it will not be fed on by the bees. So feeding, in my opinion, is a necessary thing. Several different ways you can feed your bees. But in the summer, what you need to do is feed a one-to-one sugar to water syrup, a simple syrup. And then you can add things like Honey Bee Healthy. You can add some other commercial products you can buy out there. You can put some lemongrass oil in it, which helps attract the bees and gives them a little bit of scent where they can find that easier. Lemongrass oil, even a little bit of spearmint oil. If you're mixing the syrup one-to-one, then you can put about 3 to 5 drops of lemongrass oil per gallon of syrup, and then about 1 drop of spearmint oil if you want to use that. And that's what I use, and that's why I know a little bit more about that. Honey Bee Healthy I have not used before. It's supposed to have some amino acids and some proteins in it that they can use. You can check that out. So how do we feed these bees? Well, there's several different ways you can feed them. There's entrance feeders that you can feed the bees, and that's just like it says, it goes into the entrance of that hive and provides syrup for that individual hive. Entrance feeders provide for one specific hive, and that's just like I said, it goes into the entrance. Boardman feeders is one that I have used before, works very well. It's a little tray that slides into the entrance. You can use a quart mason jar or similar to put your one-to-one syrup in, and then put a perforated cap on there so the bees can get to that nectar, and then set that on top of that tray that slides in the entrance. Advantages of that, it's easy to get to. You do not have to get into the hive to access that. You can clearly see the levels of feed from the outside and see how they're consuming that, and see if you need to add some more or if they're doing okay with that. The second type of group of feeders, is going to be an in the hive feeder. Now you've got top feeders that will go on top of the hive to feed it, and they can hold 2 to 2.5 gallons depending on if you've got a 10 frame or an 8 frame wide hive. And your hive needs to be level for this, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to put near as much syrup into that container. Also, you can use top feeders like we have before in the past, where you can use one of the perforated jar lids and a quart jar and set it on top of the inner cover, the small hole that's in the inner cover, and they can feed from that. Disadvantages of these, you have to remove the top to see the level of your syrup and see if you need to add more or if they've got sufficient quantities. There's also some that you have to get deeper into the hive to use, and that would be like a frame feeder, where they replace one of the frames of the beehive, either a deep or a medium, and they will hold syrup, and they will hold less than a gallon, and you actually have to dig into the hive to get to that, fill it, and check it. All these entrance hive feeders and the in-hive feeders have ways to keep the bees from getting into the syrup and drowning. And the third way to feed your bees, third category, would be an open feeder or community feeder. And that is something that you would set outside the hive in the open that they can get to. You can check the quantities on it. It's simple and easy to do. You simply fill it up with syrup, set it outside somewhere where the bees can get to it, and they will do the rest. And then you can check on that periodically to see if you need to refill that. Now, if you use a open or community feeder, you need to keep that away from your colonies, from your apiary, and back that up somewhere around 200 or 300 feet from your colonies, more if you can. Now, the trouble with open feeding, you're going to be feeding more than your bees. You're going to be feeding your neighbor's bees. You're going to be feeding that colony that's nesting in a tree, or the lady's house down the road that they built a hive in the attic. So you're going to be feeding more than your bees, and you could be feeding more than just honeybees. You could be feeding some other insects. Concerns on the open feeder about disease. Have not been any major studies that I can find where there have been a lot of transmission of diseases. There have been some concerns about varroa mite spread from this, but varroa mites do not propagate in this way. They're not going to hop one bee to another bee. It's like they're like a tick. They are attached to that bee, and they attach to that bee when they're in the larva state or the pupa state inside the hive. So they're not going to transfer on an open feeder. And small hive beetles do not ride bees. They just go into the colony. So you will not have any transfer of small hive beetles. The only thing that I would be concerned about would be American foul brood transferring. Now we're going to see how to make an open feeder 5 gallon. Top feeders can run you $35, $40. Entrance feeders can run you $6 to $10. The frame feeders can run you about $6 to $7 a piece. I spent about $6 on this whole thing, and I can feed all my bees with this. So that's what I'm going to do. It's economical, it's easy to do, it's less time consuming, and for me it's just easier, and I haven't ever had any problems feeding my bees like this. I do go through a lot of syrup this way. All right, so let's get started. So first thing you want to do is your drill bit needs to be no larger than a 1/16 of an inch. And that's what this one is, a 1/16. You can go smaller, but you do not need to go any larger than a 1/16 inch. Now what we're going to do is, this bucket has a lid with it. Got the bucket, I've got a piece of tape around here that's marked, and I've got it marked about every 1/2 inch, so I'm going to end up with 62 to 64 holes in this thing. And what we'll do is pour the syrup inside the bucket, mix it up, put the lid on, and then invert that. Set it on something solid. You can use a bucket like this, or you can use one that's got a little bit better seal on it, like a food grade bucket. And what will happen is when you turn this upside down, some syrup will run out, and it will draw a vacuum in there, and that will keep it from dripping out. Kind of like a waterer for a rabbit, something like that. Works on the same principle. We've got these holes marked. This lid, when it goes on, still leaves this amount open. So we're going to drill these holes just right above this rim on this, and that way any syrup that does run out will run into this tray. The small enough tray that no bees are going to drown in that. They can get up to this, feed, and go away. The stronger hives will send out more foragers, but they're not a colony once they're on the outside. They don't act like a colony. They're individual bees then. They might mark the place where they can find the syrup, but they're not gonna work as a team to try to get the syrup and keep other bees away. So that is not a concern. So what we're gonna get started and drill a hole on every one of these marks, every 1/2 inch, 1/16 of an inch, all the way through. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to hit every mark exactly. If you get it a little bit off, it's not gonna hurt anything. If you get it a lot off, it's not gonna hurt anything. You just don't want a bigger hole, because if you get too big a hole, the syrup will just run out and not form a vacuum. We've got that completed. And dump out any plastic inside there, not get in the way. Now what we'll do is fill this bucket with a 1-to-1 sugar syrup and then feed the bees that way. So a 1-to-1, you can do it by weight or measure sugar to water. Also add about 3 to 5 drops of lemongrass oil per gallon and 1 drop of spearmint oil if you've got it. They need to be food grade if you can. Okay, so we got to add just a little more water to it. Find my handle. Finish off 3 gallons. So I went to a chef's school site and they gave me instructions on how to mix 5 gallons of simple syrup. And it's 3 gallons and 16 ounces of water measured and 25 pounds of sugar. And that is just have filled this 5-gallon bucket. Now we're just going to give this a stir. I used a little bit warmer water to help this mix a little easier. 1-to-1 simple syrup, it's not hard to mix up. When you go to 2-to-1, you definitely need to have some hot water to mix that 2-to-1. 2-to-1 syrup fed to bees is going to be for the late fall, early winter, if the temperatures in your area allow that, because you do not want them to have to cure out that much. If you cut the water in half, it's a lot easier for those bees to cure that syrup into usable honey on a 2-to-1 in later fall. All right, I believe we've got that mixed up. We'll put our lid on. Now this lid is not a real tight seal. You want to support this when you're flipping it over. You can ask me how I know that, but I bet you know the answer to that, so just do that.